So Kathy will be presenting on the role of piano exams in musical education. Kathy Dornian is a nationally respected pedagogue, chamber musician, adjudicator, and RCM examiner. Since 1985, Kathy has served on faculty at Mount Royal Conservatory, where she pursues an extensive and versatile career as a musician. For many years, she served as piano coordinator of the Academy of Music, a prestigious and nationally renowned program for gifted young musicians. She travels throughout Canada and the US as an adjudicator, workshop clinician, and senior examiner for the Royal Conservatory of Music. In 2019, Kathy was awarded the prestigious National Teacher of Distinction Award by the Royal Conservatory of Music. Known as a kind, inspiring, and imaginative educator who fosters keenness and curiosity in her students, she is certainly one of Calgary's most sought-after teachers. Her students are frequent award and scholarship winners and consistently achieve high results in exams. Kathy, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Hello, everybody, and it's my pleasure to be here. And thank you to my colleagues, Colleen and Alan, for sharing such wonderful pedagogical insights with you. Clearly, there's a bit of an overlap in what we all talk about, but I am going to specifically address the role of exams in musical education for today. Sarah, please switch. So this is a quote by famous Canadian pedagogue, Warren Mould. It is commendable to use examinations as an incentive to study. Letting them become the reason for study is not. So before I talk about the role of exams, I'd like to talk about what exams should not be used for. Exams should not be a means to an end or an end of itself any more than when you take a subject in school, you do it only in order to do well on an exam. That is an unrealistic goal, and it's also very, very limiting. Switch slides, please. Realistically, the truly valuable prize is one of appreciation and understanding, and to foster a love of music and a lifelong involvement in and love for the arts. For me as a teacher, this is very, very important. So just to give a couple of anecdotes, in some ways I place greater value in somebody who maybe achieved a level 8, but they went on and they kept playing, they attended concerts, they continued to love music and make it a part of their life, as opposed to somebody who achieves their ARCT and then never touches the piano again, and their sole reason for doing so is in order to get high school credits or something to put on their resume. These are valid goals as well, but I think the most important goal is the appreciation and love for the arts. I have one student right now, just to give it as an example, and she had completed her AR a couple of years ago, and like many of my former students who disproportionately went into medicine, she will frequently email me and let me know that she's working on such and such a Chopin etude on her own, and can I help her with this fingering or that fingering? So things like that really, really warm my heart. Next slide, please. So think of exams as being like one part and one part only of the totality of the musical education of the child. What does this involve? Obviously, going to your lessons and practicing is going to be a big percentage of it. Performance opportunities, recitals, master classes, playing for your friends and family, playing in the community, these kinds of engagements. Collaborative ensemble work, which I place great value on, because so often as pianists, we're just sitting in the practice room by ourselves, and it's such a joy and a completely different musical experience to be sharing music making with others. Of course, doing our theory, harmony, and history is part of holistic education. And I'm also a firm believer in attending concerts, not just for the sheer joy of it, but also in support of the different arts organizations in our community. So exams and assessments occasionally place a part in this musical education, but should definitely not be seen as a be-all and an end-all. So on this topic, one of the things that greatly disappoints me at times when I get a transfer student, one of my questions when I get a transfer student is, give me an idea of what you learned in the previous year. And when I get an answer such as, well, I learned my list A and my list B and my list C piece for the exam, that I just find very, very disappointing. So one of my pedagogical goals and beliefs is that particularly in the younger grades, I like my students to learn as many, many different pieces as possible, because it's this kind of grounding that is going to give them the foundation to become excellent pianists and excellent musicians. The diversity of repertoire that our children, our young people are afforded is immense. I'm constantly amazed by the creativity of the composers that have been doing their work, particularly in the past 50 years. I equate this sometimes with children's literature. I grew up in the generation where children's literature consisted of See Spot Run, and now the wealth of children's literature is beyond astounding, and it's exactly the same in the musical world. And I encourage all of you to go out and explore the wonderful world of music that's out there and available to your students, that encompasses way beyond what's actually in the Royal Conservatory books, which is, at the end of the day, is just a small sampling of the available repertoire to us. So when I say I like my students to learn lots of repertoire, does this mean that necessarily every single piece is brought up to a polished performance standard? Not really. It just means that I have certain pedagogical goals that I set for that piece, and then we move on. It's like, I think Alan made reference earlier to a level 1 student sitting on the same piece for 6 months. Absolutely, that's nonsensical, right? So, because what happens, as many of you will know, is by the time you get to level 8, level 9, level 10, partly because of school commitments, partly because of the difficulty of the repertoire, we are more limited to playing only a certain number of key pieces a year. So by learning much repertoire, it just gives the students a much, much better grounding. Let's switch slides, please, Sarah. So for a parent or teacher to judge an entire year's worth of study on the basis of an examination result is grossly misguided and entirely unfair to the student. And again, I come back to my school analogy. It's the same as judging your entire year's worth in an English class or in a math class based on the results of one examination. Switch, please. So there are many, moving on to exams, however, so let's assume that exams are going to be a well-rounded part of the musical education of the students that you're teaching. There are definitely many benefits that we can consider. Some of these include a balanced, well-rounded approach. Well, what does that mean? Well, the Royal Conservatory curriculum prescribes a wide variety and diversity of repertoire from all different eras. And I should include that, of course, as many of you will have noticed, the books these days also include Broadway, pop, jazz, all kinds of different styles. So there's really is something there for everybody, to appeal to everybody. It also, of course, includes the all-important theoretical requirements, as well as sight reading and ear training, all of which work together in order to produce a holistic musical environment. There's a logical sequence of learning, which I find is particularly beneficial to young teachers such as yourselves as a starting point. So the grades are quite logically sequenced as you move through from level to level. Exams give students an attainable, targeted, shorter-term goal. And goals are great for all kinds of reasons. Motivation, a sense of pride. I know I was like that myself. I remember even when I was at university, I always was and still am very, very passionate about music, but I worked that much harder if I knew that on such and such a day and such a time I had to have this piece sort of performance ready. So that's another real benefit. On a practical level, students do attain high school credits, and I did mention earlier that it's a nice thing to have on your resume. There's nothing wrong with that. Motivation, sense of pride. They give us stepping stones, milestones, a lovely feeling of accomplishment. Provides us a challenge as we move through the levels and increasingly deal with pieces that are maybe a little bit more difficult each time. It's a measured sense of progress from grade to grade. There's a dedication to learning, and they establish a goal that gives us a good stimulus to learning. Often when you take an exam, you'll notice when you read the comments of examiners that they're just echoing what the teachers are saying. So this is another aspect of it, is that it really backs up what you in your own studio are teaching. Let's switch sides, please. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, when we do exams, and this is where I want to just draw on my quite considerable experience on an examiner, and to give you a guideline, because after all, when we do an exam, everybody wants to get the highest possible mark possible for what it's worth. So what are some of the things that we're looking for? So first of all is consistency. I want to address the topic of consistency. And what does that mean? Sometimes as an examiner, I find that the students that attain the highest scores are not necessarily always the ones that we might consider the most gifted per se, but the ones that come into an exam absolutely and completely fully prepared, consistent in every area of the exam and consistent within each area of the exam. So to give you an example, as many of you know, an RCM exam is broken down into 4 general categories: the repertoire, the technical requirements, the ear training, and the sight reading. So technical, I ask a D major scale, and it's played beautifully. I ask an F sharp minor scale, and the student fumbles all over the place. I ask a dominant 7th chord, and they don't seem to know what I'm talking about. So these are just some hands-on examples of inconsistency within a category. Same with the pieces. You have 3 pieces, say, in the earlier grades. One of them is beautifully prepared, has lots of character, and then other ones are less well prepared, and the student just fumbles through them. So that's inconsistency. Often ear training and sight reading are overlooked. These are such important musical skills that we want to develop. And very often, if you're worried about marks for your exams, for your students' exams, often marks are lost in those areas as well. So that's what we mean by consistency. Let's move on to preparation. Preparation may seem obvious that when we go to an exam, we want to be prepared. Yet so often I hear exams that are very, very ill-prepared on all kinds of different levels. In school, students are often familiar with the concept of a rubric. A rubric is merely a set of guidelines that outlines what the expectations are for a particular set of assignments. It should be no different in a music exam. So I think one of your jobs as a teacher is to make sure that the students know what that examiner is listening for. So what are we listening for? Well, let's start with the basics. Accuracy of notes, doing what's on the page in terms of what the specified rhythm is definitely a requirement, but it's only a beginning. One of the big things that I look for simply is doing what's on the page. And of course, we know that the more, shall we say, modern the music, the more composers are actively detailed about writing in many, many markings of what they see. Yet I might be following along a score and I see an accent, I don't hear it. I see a crescendo, I don't hear it. I see staccatos, I don't hear it. So if it's on the page, I want to hear it. One thing I tell my students with regards to interpretation is I have a little analogy, and I compare interpreting a piece of music with peeling off layers of an onion. As in, we dig deeper and deeper to try and get to the core of what that composer is trying to say. First layer is the easiest. Just do what's on the page. And then we can start delving more and more into the meaning behind those notes. Faithfulness to the score, rhythmic stability. If there's not much on the page, in the case of Baroque and certain classical pieces, then what we expect to see is that such details have been given due consideration. If it's a Baroque piece, there are certain stylistic specific things that we are listening for. We would be listening for some terracing of dynamics, a sense of phrasing, articulation, how the student captures the rhythmic vitality of the particular dance that they're playing. These are just some of many examples. When we move on to classical music, we're looking for thematic differentiation, balance between the hands, control of the 16th note figurations, phrasing, always, always, always beautiful, beautiful phrasing. We're always listening for that. So beautiful tone, beautiful phrasing, clear pedaling, character, rhythmic vitality, colors, note values, rests, range of dynamics, expression, articulation. Just like in your own studio, you probably notice that often you ask students to do more. Could I have more dynamics, more character, more vitality? We as examiners are no different. We want that performance to really, really project and to really, really speak to us. I also like to use the word clear because I think you can plug that word in to so many different pedagogical concepts. And this ties in with what Colleen said as a little bit of a practicing tip. So a student can question themselves and ask themselves, is my fill in the blank clear? Is my pedaling clear? Are my dynamics clear? Are my thematic differentiations clear? I mean, the list can go on and on and on, but these are the things that we're listening for. If the student has a little bit of a slip, we're all human. I've had slips, I'm sure my colleagues have had, we all do. But in an exam situation, we want to teach and encourage our students how to drive through that slip because maintaining a sense of steady beat is paramount. Get back on track. Don't drive over the same place again. What's done is done. Keep that forward flow and line going as much as possible. We've already forgotten about that mistake. We're just listening to what we're hearing in the here and now. So another aspect I'd want to touch upon down here is perform. Now, I realize that taking an exam is a little bit of an artificial situation, whether you've been doing it online, as in the past year, or live. You walk into a room, there's one person there, and examiners, like everybody else in the world, have different personalities. I like to teach my students, you're not doing an exam, you're doing a performance. We should be teaching this to our students regardless, because there's a big difference between practicing and performing. And when you're performing, you're putting on your performer's hat and your performance mindset. And what does that mean? It means to play with conviction, with character, trying your best to do exactly what the message of the composer is. And personal involvement is a really big one for me, because so much of what I hear feels like the student is a bit disengaged from what they're doing. So reaching out, touching your audience, you have to just sort of get yourself into the mindset that one examiner sitting there is your audience. And you may not be getting the same kind of energy as at a recital. You may not be getting the same kind of feedback with applause, but the performer's mindset has to still be there. As an examiner, the best performances, I was going to say exams, but I'm going to say the best performances that I have heard are exactly these. They're the ones where I want to stop typing. They're the ones where I want to put my pencil down because I'm so engaged and drawn in to what the person is doing that the last thing I want to be doing is writing about it. I'm just totally engaged. And similarly, if I can throw in a pedagogical tip, when you're teaching, this should be, in my mind, a huge goal of your teaching. So my colleagues have pointed out so many wonderful things about teaching beginners, about practicing. So when you're teaching, pick a topic, whether it's evenness of scales, whether it's balance, whether it's correct articulations, whether it's getting a certain tone. All of these are very important and very specific, but none of them are an end in and of themselves. Collectively, they work together to the ultimate goal, which is to come up with a communicative performance. I know when I'm writing up exam reports, I try my best to always speak to character, because there's no point if there's no character in our music. And that's what the goal should be. Project your musical ideas and communicate. Most examiners value conviction, even with a few slips, over note perfect but mechanical or timid playing. Sure, we all want to give a clean performance, right? But at the end of the day, it's what you're saying with your music that's really important. Now, as young teachers, I would be remiss if we're talking about exams and I didn't say something about marks, because maybe I'm going to make the assumption that some of you are maybe not familiar with the RCM rubric. So basically, it divides into different categories. Under 60 would be considered a not passing grade. 60 to 70 is a passing grade. 70 to 79 is what's called honors. 80 to 89 is first class honors, and above 90 is what's called distinction. So again, as teachers, I want you to be familiar with the rubric, so to speak, that is tied in with each of these specific categories. Typically, if a student does not achieve a passing grade, it is reflective of lack of preparation. So not getting a passing grade is usually a performance that notes have not even been prepared, rhythms have not even been prepared, it doesn't have any sense of fluency, little if any awareness of style, and so on and so forth. So the general tone of the exam report will draw on the fact that more preparation is needed in order to properly and sufficiently assess the performance. In the 60 to 70 range, if a student plays with relative accuracy of notes and mostly stability of rhythm, as much as I hate to say it, that's going to get you a passing grade. But this particular performance has little else to offer. Not much in the way of dynamics or shaping or awareness of style, tonal beauty, so on and so forth. When we get into the 70 to 79 range, for me, the magic word in that range is some. There's some evidence of attention to dynamics, attention to shaping, a certain awareness of style, right? Might not be technically completely fluent yet, but it certainly shows that the piece is well on its way and developing in the right direction. A first-class performance in the 80 to 89 range is a performance that is lots of detail in it. So we're now going to take the word some and we're going to change it to much or a lot. Lots of attention to detail, clear awareness of style, very meticulous and faithful to what's on the score, communicative. Now, when we get into that over 90, very special with distinction range, which, by the way, I should also point out, is rarely awarded. I know in my own studio, sometimes students may not achieve the result that they were looking for. So let's say, for example, a student gets a 78, which is actually a very decent Royal Conservatory mark. These days, our high-achieving students are used to receiving 90s and 95s in school. So they get a 78 on their piano exam and somehow they think they're a complete failure. And yet in many grades, 78 is above the national average for the RCM standard. I should also point out that achieving the higher grades is, maybe I should say, easier to reach in the early grades. So if you are putting your students in for the preparatory A and the preparatory B exams, and even level 1, you will generally see very high marks. High 80s, 90s are commonplace. These exams are meant to be encouraging as a young student's first exam, and so they should be. But often when we get to level 8 and 9, 10 ARCT licentiate, the bar is considerably higher. Expectations are much more specific. And so it is not uncommon that the grades are lower at those ends. But that just gives you some idea of sort of where the marks fit in. Give me 1 second here. I would encourage you to encourage your students to aim for their personal best. That's what it's all about. If somebody can walk out of the performance and say, I felt good and I think I played that piece to the best of my ability, I think that in and of itself is good enough, regardless of the outcome and regardless of what the mark is given. Practice performing. That's very, very important, right? Many of our students are used to cramming for their school exams. I know this to be true when I talk to many of my high school students. Cramming does not work for a music exam. They must be prepared well ahead of time. How much is well ahead of time? My general rule of thumb is at least 3 weeks for the younger grades, more for level 9, 10, and ARCT. Because you need time to play through your program, to put on that performer's hat, to play for your teachers, as Alan pointed out, in small recital groups, for grandma, for family and friends. And then you can see if something goes wrong, where some work still needs to be done. Very, very important. So many students just overlook this step and they just come in, and it's obviously something that's been done at the last minute. By rediscover, what we mean is by the time a student has achieved the goal of getting a piece to a performance standard, they have likely practiced it for weeks, months, sometimes even a year or two at the higher levels. How many times have they played that piece through? It's revolved in their minds and through their fingers hundreds and thousands of times. Yet when they walk on that stage, even if it's an exam stage, it can't sound like, oh, I'm sick and tired of this piece, I'm ready to move on. You have to make it sound fresh, alive, vital, like you're playing it for the first time. I wanted to share a little anecdote on that point with some of you might be familiar with the internationally renowned pianist Juja Wong, who I happen to have a personal connection with. And she texted me, this was a couple of years ago, and she said she was feeling nervous because she needed to record both of the Ravel piano concertos in 5 days, and she wasn't feeling ready. And I said, what do you mean you're not feeling ready? You've been playing these pieces for years. And her response was that she was reconsidering her interpretation and didn't feel that her reconsideration of the interpretation had gelled yet. And even at younger students, I think it's important to convey this goal that there are so many different ways that we can view a piece and so many different ways to continually bring it to life again and again. Switch slides, please, Sarah. Keep exams in perspective. When a student does an exam, I like to think of it as a postcard snapshot in a moment evaluation. All that hard work. I don't know how many times in the past year when I've been doing online exams, the student will finish by saying, oh, that went by so fast. And I said, yes, it's so much work to get it ready. And yes, it does go by very, very fast, right? So remember, the examiner doesn't know your student. They don't know the personal baggage. They don't know the background. They don't know whether it took them 2 months to prepare, 2 weeks, or 2 years. And honestly, they don't care because that's not their job. Their job is to assess to the best of their professional ability what they are hearing in the here and now. So when you get that mark back for your student, it's not a reflection of what they did in the past. It is certainly no reflection of any future potential. And most important, it is not a reflection of who they are as a person, but merely on their performance at that hour of that given day. Think of it as a musical checkpoint or a professional second opinion. And as I mentioned earlier, quite often the examiner is just reiterating what the teacher has been telling the student the whole year. Switch, please, Sarah. Before we get into some little odds and ends, I would also like to address a little bit. I think we would be remiss in not addressing the online versus live situation. So most of you know that because of the COVID circumstances, exams did move to an online format this year. Moving forward, the plan of the RCM is to continue to offer online exams, but also in January, the door has been opened to continue to go back to live exams. How these two will balance out in the future years is really anyone's guess. Even we don't know that. I don't think the RCM office knows that as well, because there's going to be so many different factors. There has been certainly benefits of online exams. So many students have found it more comfortable playing in the comfort of their own home on their own instrument. This is a wonderful thing. The other obvious benefit of online exams is that you can take them when you feel you're ready. So previously, as many of you might know, the live exams were offered at certain specific times of year: January, April, June, and August. Online exams opened up the door to basically a 365-day year. So if you have a student and they're ready to do their level 1 in April or in February, it's a wonderful opportunity to go ahead and do that rather than having to wait for the next live situation experience. So these are all benefits. My personal opinion is I hope that most students will embrace going back to live exams, because I do feel that there is a difference. There is something about, I have worked hard to prepare this. I'm going to dress up. I'm going to get in the car. I'm going to go to a different venue and play on a different piano for a person. And it's just a whole different performance experience than sitting there in your pajamas at your piano at home. So, like I say, that's just my opinion, but a little bit of food for thought for everybody. If you do choose to do an online exam, having conducted hundreds of them over the past year, make sure that your students are very, very familiar with what to expect. Setup of equipment, having a good microphone and a good Wi-Fi connection can make all the difference in the world. Trying out their sound links is also very, very important. And making sure that the camera angle is properly placed. A proper camera angle is one where the examiner can see the student sitting at the piano, ideally including their feet. We realize that sometimes there are physical constraints in the space that inhibit this, but if at all possible, that is certainly ideal. So moving on to my last little odds and ends, some of my personal convictions. I'm a big believer in encouraging our students to go to concerts. And this ties in with where I started my presentation about looking at exams as a holistic part of a musical education and encouraging lifelong learning. I also am a big believer in making sure that students, as they get older, are familiar with some of the great artists in the world. Sometimes I use the analogy of sports. I think Colleen made reference to dancing, I believe. So for example, let's say you have a young student who's very, very engaged in hockey, and you ask that student to name a bunch of famous hockey players. Probably after 5 minutes, you'll have to get them to stop because they're still rattling off names. And yet when I ask a level 10 piano student, well, who's your favorite interpreter of Chopin? And I get a blank stare, right? Well, can you name me any pianist at all? I still get a blank stare. So I think it's so important to get to know pianists that are currently active, as well as pianists in the bygone era, that serve as our role models and who show us what is possible when these pieces we play are interpreted in the most artistic way possible. Obviously, as your students get older, it's a very wonderful exercise in terms of comparing interpretations and assessing the relative merits and values of different points of view. One thing I've been engaged in personally in July is the Chopin International Competition is going to be taking place in October. And in July, the live portion of the semi-preliminaries was broadcast from Warsaw. And there was 160 fantastic pianists from all over the world, including some beautiful Canadian pianists. And I've just been, every day I'll pull up one or two performances, and it just heartwarming to see the level at which these students are playing. And like I said, it's inspiring for me, and I would love it to be inspiring for your students as well. I made reference earlier to exploring the repertoire. So when you definitely make sure that you are familiar with the syllabus, and be aware that there are many, many more wonderful pieces in the syllabus that are not actually in the Royal Conservatory repertoire books. I would say, in fact, that roughly only about 10% of the pieces in the repertoire books, and then there's another 90% in the syllabus. And there's such a wealth of wonderful, wonderful music, particularly in the modern era, with Canadian composers and composers from all over the world. So I still to this day make a point of finding out what's new. I mean, this is just one example. I pulled this off my shelf, and this is something I discovered last year. I don't know if you can see this. It's a new collection by Alexina Louis called Small Beautiful Things. And I had an opportunity to hear a bunch of the very talented Academy students at Mount Royal play these. And she's so inventive. She comes up with these fantastic titles: Little Balinese Dancer, Running for the Bus in the Moonlight, Water Music. So very, very imaginative, engaging, creative pieces for our young people. Another one I pulled off the shelf is this one. It's by Peter Rudzik, who's not only a Canadian composer, but right here in Calgary. And he wrote this set called Truly Astounding Animals. I love these pieces. I've used many of them with my students. And again, so imaginative. Happy grasshopper, busy woodpecker, orange striped zebra, etc., etc. And many of these two collections that I highlighted, they're approximately, now maybe these are not particularly pieces that are going to work for some of your beginner students, but as they get more advanced, they're sort of all in that level 4 to level 6, 7 range. So definitely make a point of exploring that. Also, some of you may know that the Royal Conservatory syllabus has a 7-year cycle, and we are coming to the end of that 7-year cycle. We're all working off of the 2015 syllabus, and we're excited to see the 2022 syllabus emerging soon. I have been involved to a certain degree with repertoire selections for this syllabus. And one thing that I would love to share with you is that there's certain individuals in the Royal Conservatory who have gone to great lengths to reach out to the widest possible diversity of composers across Canada from all different cultural and ethnic backgrounds. So I am super excited to see all this wonderful new music that you're going to see, not only in the RCM books, but also in the syllabus. So look for that. That's going to be coming out in 2022. I also want to make you aware, on the same train of thought, to festivals that you can engage your students with. I know that I think Alan as well, but I know Colleen for sure puts many of her students into the Contemporary Showcase. So for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a festival that takes place in early November, late October. It's a branch of the larger Alberta or Alliance for New Music projects, which goes across Canada. And what it does is it showcases music strictly by contemporary Canadian composers. And I love this festival for many reasons. One of the things I love about it is I find that it gives me something to give my students to work towards and as an incentive in the early part of the year. So I give them their contemporary showcase pieces, in some cases even in the summertime, and then we get them ready for the end of October, beginning of November. I love the fact that it focuses on Canadian music. I've had instances in the past where it turns out by pure coincidence that the adjudicator chosen happens to be the composer of the piece that we chose. Now, how cool is that, to play for the composer who wrote your piece? So students who have been fortunate enough to fall into that situation found it super exciting, and it's something they're going to just remember for their lives. I also like the fact that it is a non-competitive festival, so really the focus is on just sharing all this wealth of Canadian music. Although certainly there is a special gala concert where the adjudicator picks out certain highlighted performances. Many other festivals, so hopefully we're all hoping that the Calgary Performing Festival will bounce back to its former glory that it was, but of course we don't know that as of yet. Switch screens, please, Sarah. Okay, so You might be wondering who this is. This is my cat, Mishi, and the only reason I threw him in there was Alan made a reference earlier to cookies being an incentive. In my studio, my two cats are a big incentive, so most of them come over for lessons, not because they want to take lessons with me, because they love to cuddle my cat. No, anyway, I thought he was very cute. But I did want to say a big thank you to the Art to Heart organization. I first found out about this organization from one of my wonderful former students, Rona Kong. And I went to the website, and this was at some point back in the year, and I was so utterly impressed that this group of young people would have this kind of initiative to do this kind of thing in our community. And I can't thank you enough. And you guys are a bright future for our society in continuing these kinds of wonderful initiatives and keeping the arts alive and making sure that it's accessible to all different segments of our society. So thank you very much. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.